If you're listening to this, you already know the name. The Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. But this deep dive, it's not just about nostalgia, is it? Our mission here is really to tackle something, well, more interesting, I think, more relevant today. Why do they still feel like such a foundational, magnetic cultural force decades after they stopped recording together? Why are they still shaping art, shaping commerce in a world that looks totally different from the 1960s?
That's exactly it. That's the core tension we're digging into. The analysis we've looked at, it doesn't just frame them as, a great band from the past. It sees them as this enduring blueprint. The phrase used is the very DNA of contemporary art and celebrity.
Wow, the DNA, that's quite a claim.
It is. But the idea is they didn't just write classic songs. They actually set the rules.
Yeah.
For the creative game, sure, but also the commercial game. Rules we're all still playing by right now.
Yeah.
So we're looking at this legacy through, well, a few lenses.
Mm-hmm.
Your musical innovation, definitely, but also the powerful symbolism, the archetypes they became, and how they pioneered transformations in the industry itself.
Okay, that's huge. It's an immense legacy. So where do you even begin? If you want to understand something that massive, it feels a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be. I think we have to start with the thing that keeps pulling new generations in. And that's the music itself.
Right.
The timelessness of those records, that's the way in. And then their capacity for just relentless creative change. That's what really secures their place in history.
Okay, let's unpack that. The music. What always stuns me is just the sheer speed of their innovation. I mean, think about it. They went from I Want to Hold Your Hand in '63, simple, charming, almost, innocent pop,
Yeah, choose anything.
to Skillet Pepper just 4 years later,
Yeah.
which is this incredibly complex, psychedelic, revolutionary soundscape. That jump, that acceleration, it feels almost impossible today.
It really does. And it wasn't just songwriting genius, though. Obviously, that was there in spades. It was also a technical revolution, a big shift in mindset, really, that happened around 1966. And you absolutely have to include George Martin here, their producer.
Oh, absolutely. The fifth Beatle to many.
Right. They fundamentally changed how recorded music was even thought about. They stopped just, capturing a performance in the studio. They started treating the studio itself as an instrument.
Yeah.
Like a creative laboratory, full of possibilities for manipulation.
Okay, let's get specific on that. The manipulation. We hear about technical innovations, but what did they actually pioneer, or at least popularize, that we still hear the echoes of today?
Oh, the list is huge, honestly. But let's pick a couple of key ones.
Yeah.
Automatic double tracking ADT. That's a big one. See, back then, if you wanted a vocal to sound thicker, richer, you'd have the singer sing the exact same part twice, which is frankly tedious.
Right, and hard to get perfect.
Exactly. ADT was this ingenious way to instantly create a duplicate, slightly delayed audio track. It thickened the sound electronically. And the story goes they developed it partly because John Lennon just got bored singing the same lines over and over.
Huh. Necessity, or maybe boredom, is the mother of invention.
Pretty much. And that whole approach, messing with tape speed, using multi-track recorders creatively, not just functionally, that laid the groundwork for, well, almost all modern production techniques you hear now.
So you're saying every time a producer today adds some weird vocal effect or builds up these huge washes of sound, they're essentially dipping into a toolkit that the Beatles and George Martin figured out, often on just 4-track machines.
In a very real sense, yes. That's incredible ingenuity, often born directly out of those technical limitations.
Okay.
And this whole experimental attitude, it directly led to the idea of the album as art. By the time you get to Tea Pepper or even Revolver before it, they weren't just collecting singles onto an LP. They were creating these cohesive, conceptual statements. The whole album mattered, more than just the individual songs. They really established that format, the album, as the artist's big defining statement.
And the sheer scope within that catalog, that's what gives it such durability, right? It just refuses to be pigeonholed. You've got everything from like the gentlest folk pop ballads, Yesterday, Blackbird,
Beautiful songs.
to just raw, almost proto-metal aggression like Helter Skelter. And then you have the really out there stuff, the experimental chaos of Revolution 9, that tape collage.
And we absolutely have to mention George Harrison's role here, too. His deep dive into Indian classical music was critical. When he brought in the sitar, the tabla, the ideas of Indian raga, it wasn't just adding some exotic flavor.
Yeah, it felt deeper than that.
It really expanded the whole harmonic language of Western pop. Pop was mostly stuck in standard major and minor keys. Raga introduced modal sounds, different scales, different ways of building melodies and tension. It really helped open the door for Western pop to absorb sounds from all over the globe.
That depth certainly gives the music a timeless feel. It doesn't just sound like the 60s.
Mm.
But you mentioned their relevance is active, not just historical. How do we actually see that? How do we quantify it now?
Well, you look at a couple of things. Active listening, for one, and direct influence, sometimes in surprising places. I mean, the obvious rock and pop lineage is there. You hear it in bands like Oasis, Blur, Foo Fighters, countless others.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the research suggests that even very contemporary pop writers, people like Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas, they didn't just listen to the Beatles, they actively studied the Lennon-McCartney songwriting craft. They apparently dissected the structures, the efficiency, the way melodies worked in those songs. It's still like required reading if you want to write hits.
That's fascinating. The technical craft endures. But, it's maybe harder to picture direct influence from a 60s band filtering into something like modern hip-hop or R&B. Isn't the sound world just too different?
You'd think so, maybe. But influence travels through melody and emotion, not just production styles. Think about Frank Ocean. He's one of the most innovative, respected artists working today, right? On his track, White Ferrari, from the Blonde album, he directly samples the melody and the feel of McCartney's Here, There, and Everywhere. It's woven right in there. That choice connects the sort of emotional core of that 1966 ballad straight into this very modern, introspective R&B landscape.
Yeah.
It gives this timeless, recognizable feeling to an otherwise really forward-thinking track.
Wow, I didn't realize that specific connection. That's a powerful example. And then there's the commercial side, the sheer numbers.
Right. The data is undeniable. The Beatles generate billions of streams still,
Yeah.
decades after they broke up. And that's not just, the baby boomer generation reliving their youth.
No, billions of streams means something else is happening.
Exactly. It confirms that new, younger generations people growing up in a completely different playlist-driven world are actively choosing to listen. They're discovering it for themselves on their own terms.
Okay, so the music hooks them. They're actively listening.
Which brings us neatly to the other huge piece of their enduring power. The symbolism, the power of their personalities. The archetypes they established are almost as important in some ways as the music itself.
Ah, yes. The sort of core engine of the whole Beatle phenomenon, that duality of genius, Lennon and McCartney. They really became the prototype, didn't they, for almost every big creative partnership that came after.
Their tension was their strength in many ways. You had John Lennon, the rebel, the visionary. He became this icon of counterculture, the artist challenging the status quo, asking big questions. His image, the round glasses, the activism, it's still shorthand for that kind of idealism. And imagine, it's basically a global anthem.
Still is, absolutely. And then balancing him, you had Paul McCartney, the master craftsman, the optimist perhaps. He's the archetype of the polished, enduring rock star. And what keeps him so relevant now is that he's still out there.
Right. His continued presence, touring, playing these massive shows to audiences spanning generations, he provides this living, breathing connection back to that history. For young fans especially, he's the bridge to that past.
A tangible link.
Exactly. But we can't just talk about John and Paul. The analysis is clear. George and Ringo were essential, not just sidemen.
Right, George Harrison, the spiritual explorer, as you called it.
Yeah. He wasn't just dabbling. He seriously introduced transcendental meditation, Eastern spirituality, into the mainstream West. It wasn't just a fad for him. That deep interest helped open the door culturally for a broader acceptance of Eastern philosophy, non-Western ideas. You see traces of that everywhere now, from wellness culture to global music fusion. He kind of embodies the artist searching for deeper meaning.
And Ringo Starr, the relatable everyman. Sometimes it feels too simple just calling him the drummer.
His role was absolutely vital. The analysis calls him the necessary humanity and grounding force. In that sometimes volatile mix of huge talents and egos, he was the steady, unshowy presence, the reliable heartbeat. He provided that solid, relatable foundation that honestly probably kept the whole thing from just flying apart much sooner.
Okay, so we have the music, the personalities, the archetypes. Let's pivot to the institutional changes. Because like you said, they weren't just writing songs, they were disrupting the whole industry. They changed the rules of pop culture. And sometimes, looking back, those business decisions feel almost more relevant today than the music itself.
It really starts with that first explosion, Beatlemania. That phenomenon showed the world something new, this unprecedented level of global, synchronized, youth-driven hysteria.
Before them, teenagers were a market, maybe, but not seen as this force.
Exactly. The sheer commercial and social power of the teenage market was poorly understood. Beatlemania proved it was massive. It forced media, advertisers, everyone to suddenly reckon with the idea of the global youth consumer as a central force.
You can definitely draw lines from that to modern viral fandoms, can't you? Like
Yeah,
with K-pop groups or huge TikTok stars. The Beatles kind of proved that a unified young audience could shift the cultural center of gravity.
precisely. And their visual impact was just as immediate. Those early mop-top haircuts, then later the incredible psychedelic clothes, they instantly changed global fashion. They were arguably the first massive group to show that an act could be this powerful, cohesive visual brand, a lifestyle thing, reaching way beyond just the music charts.
And that iconic Ed Sullivan Show appearance in '64, the sources always cite that as the moment the British invasion truly landed, right? Shifting rock and roll center away from the US, at least for a while.
It's seen as the watershed moment, yeah.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the longer-lasting institutional stuff. The business side. They really did set a new standard for artist autonomy.
How so, specifically?
Well, primarily, their insistence on writing their own songs and controlling their creative output. Before them, it was much more common for artists, especially pop acts, to be given songs by professional writers.
Right, the Brill building model and all that.
Yeah. The Beatles fought for and won the idea that the musicians themselves should be the primary creative drivers, not just interpreters. That philosophy spread throughout the industry.
But the really ambitious and famously kind of messy part of that push for autonomy was Apple Corps. We can't just gloss over that as a success, can we? We need to talk about what it represented.
No, you're right. Apple Corps was this incredibly bold, maybe naive, early attempts to control everything. Their own music publishing, their recordings, films, merchandising, the whole creative empire, owned and run by the artists.
An amazing idea, a revolutionary concept for the time.
Absolutely. The blueprint was visionary. The idea that artists should own and manage their own work.
But the execution wasn't famously chaotic. A bit of a financial mess that launched some cool things but lacked basic business sense.
Oh, completely. It was riddled with chaos, failed projects, mismanagement. It became a huge headache.
Yeah.
But that very ambition and the struggles that came with it, the need for them to eventually figure out how to regain control, that whole saga laid the groundwork. It showed other artists what was possible, even if it also showed how incredibly hard it was. Modern artists setting up their own labels, controlling their own media, they owe a debt to that messy Apple experiment. The Beatles were pioneers by trying, succeeding, and failing so spectacularly in public.
It's like the idea itself was more powerful and lasting than the initial flawed execution. And one more thing on the innovation front, we have to touch on the visual side again, beyond fashion, music videos.
Yes, their promotional films, especially for songs like Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane,
Yeah.
these weren't just clips of them playing. They were like short, surreal, artistic films, really sophisticated for the time. They were early, crucial examples of what evolved into the modern music video. They grasped very early on that sound and vision needed to merge for maximum impact in popular culture.
So all these innovations, ADT, the concept album, Apple Corps, the promo films, they eventually just became part of the fabric of music. Which brings us to what the analysis calls maybe the highest form of influence. This idea of the Seinfeld is unfunny principle.
It's a really insightful concept. The principle basically says that a key sign of how truly groundbreaking something was, whether it's Seinfeld's type of humor or the Beatles' musical language, is when its innovations become so standard, so woven into everything that comes after, that new generations encounter them and just think, well, yeah, that's just how things are. They don't even recognize it as an innovation anymore.
So, like, someone listening to a modern pop song today hears layered vocals, maybe some weird tape effects, unusual chord changes, and they just assume that's normal, that's just how music sounds, without realizing the Beatles were basically inventing that stuff on primitive gear 60 years ago.
Exactly that. Their breakthroughs are so deeply embedded now in our shared artistic vocabulary that the original genius gets a bit hidden. Simply because it was so successful, so widely adopted. They literally changed the language of pop music.
And it's a story that keeps getting refreshed, doesn't it? Whether it's the buzz around the final song, Now and Then in 2023, using AI to isolate John's old vocal, or Peter Jackson's incredible Get Back documentary, giving us this unprecedented look inside their process. Their history and their music are constantly being re-examined, rediscovered, presented to new audiences with fresh eyes and ears.
Which absolutely ensures their relevance is secure, probably for a very long time to come. To sum it up, really, their music is like the Rosetta Stone of rock and pop, as the analysis puts it. You needed to decipher everything else. Their personalities became the archetypes for modern celebrity. Their business struggles paved the way for artist autonomy. They're not just history. They are effectively the literary canon of popular music. Required study if you want to understand the form.
That feels like a definitive take. As long as new artists are trying to write that perfect, simple 3-minute pop song. Or at the other end, trying to create some complex, layered, genre-bending masterpiece, they're almost inevitably going to find themselves going back to the Beatles, consciously or not, to see how it's done.
They absolutely remain the benchmark.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on after this discussion. We talked about that powerful mix the Beatles had. The personalities, the constant innovation, the drive for business control. Thinking about the music scene right now, who today? Which contemporary artist, or maybe even a collective, who do you think might be using those same kinds of foundational principles, innovation, persona, control, to lay the groundwork for achieving that same kind of lasting, maybe even 100-year cultural relevance? Something to think about as you maybe go listen to some Beatles tracks with fresh ears.